you have to question why you continue to invest in the state of Minnesota.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you about ag related topics, ag markets, and everything related to rural lifestyle as well. Well, today I've got Brad Freking with me, and he has a company in Minnesota that's called New Fashion Pork. Now, it's actually been going for quite a while, and it's a fascinating story. And I wanted Brad to kind of share his story with you because it has to do with the current business climate we have nationwide. There are a lot of obstacles. Things are not necessarily getting any more business friendly these days. Would you agree with that, Brad?
Yes, Marlon, we're located in southwest Minnesota, and we're only 10 miles north of the Iowa border, and we're about 70 miles east of South Dakota. And our business operates in several different states. But being a border person, you really start to appreciate and understand the material differences between the business climate in our surrounding states.
Now, what led you to get into the swine industry? From what I understand, talking with you before we came on to the recording here, you were telling me that right out of college, you kind of had your foot in that direction already.
Yeah, well, my wife and I, Meg, we grew up in Jackson County, which, Comstock's based out of rural Iowa. So we'd be about an hour straight north on Highway 71. And we were both farm kids. I grew up 200 sows, fur to finish, 600 acres. And, we're products of the 1980s, the Great Ag Depression. And, you know, yeah, so we all grew up in hard times. And, I remember coming back from college, South Dakota State University, and working on the farm for the weekend. And I was fortunate enough to get a tank of gas to go back to school, so yeah, I mean, both Meg and I grew up in that environment, and I was fortunate enough to get accepted in vet school, graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1994, and had the opportunity to start New Fashion Pork straight out of vet school.
Why do it that way? You started that company. What was your goal when you did that?
For me, during that time period, Marlon, the industry was rapidly changing. The Southeast, the Murphys, the Smithfields, they're becoming a power force. And so my first year of internship in vet school, my first summer I spent with private practices throughout the Midwest. And then my second year, I interned with all the large companies that were growing and developing in the US. And, I'm not going to say the writing was on the wall, but it became apparent that the industry was going to change and consolidate and grow, or these bigger entities were going to grow. And so my choice coming out of vet school is go to work for one of those larger entities, or I met a veterinarian from Ontario, Canada, Dr. Mike Wilson, and he had this idea of bringing wean pigs out of Ontario to the Midwest where we had cheaper feed and better access to markets. So that's how the business started. Mike and I became partners. Um, we traveled around, pitched his idea to several producers in the area. They thought he was nuts. And so I'm like, hey, Mike, after a week of this, why don't we just form a company and do this together? And that's how New Fashion Pork started. And then we're able to use the downturns in the industry of 98 when pigs went to 8 cents and 0203. And then we did a series of acquisitions of sow farms that spread us from Wyoming, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. And that's really why we're so spread out, because every one of those acquisitions, it was an opportunity acquisition. So we grow the baby pigs on the fringes where there aren't a lot of pigs. And fortuitously, it's working out well because lack of pigs means higher health status. And then we bring the baby pigs back here, the wean pigs, back to Minnesota, Iowa, where we finish them. access to cheaper corn and closer to the plants.
Did I hear you say 1998? Because that was my early years of getting into farm broadcasting, and if I remember right, wasn't that the time frame where there for a while the feed was worth more than the pigs you were feeding it to?
Oh, absolutely. That was a time period, and every pork producer will remember it because pigs went to 8 cents, and kind of break evens during that time were like 38, 40 cents. So I mean, it was an absolute wipeout, bloodbath. But we were positioned, basically debt free at that time. So we were able to not only grow the business, but acquire these assets in these other states that had failed during that time period.
So you had a long game in mind already at that point. So how did that evolve? Now, I know that you have kind of evolved into multiple operations, other locations. You're involved with a food company now. Explain how that all ties in now.
Yeah, so it started really in 1998 with 8 cent pigs. A group of producers were saying, "Hey, that this isn't working. I mean, processors are making tons of money, and but the situation didn't work out in 1998. But in 2003, the next downturn, that same set of producers came together again, and we forged ahead with building our own processing plant. And that was the first farmer owned plant ever done in our business, in the pork business. And the name of that company is Tramp Foods. And we started operations in January of 2006.
Where at?
St. Joe, Missouri.
Oh, okay. So now you're bridging out beyond Minnesota at that point, and so you've had experience in multiple states. So now you get a chance to see how business conditions are in different geographic locations, right?
Exactly.
All right. So what did that teach you?
South Dakota, South Dakota has always been very friendly to the business environment, no income tax, but they really didn't like pigs initially. So there's a lot of battles on permitting things like that. So what happened with us being on the border, we just naturally migrated our live operations more into Iowa on the finishing barns. It was a less hostile environment, and today, Marlon, the significant issue is, from an income tax standpoint, business environment, South Dakota is sitting with zero state income tax. Iowa is moving their income tax down to a flat rate of 3.9% in 2026 in a couple of years. Top rate in Minnesota, 9.85%.
Wow.
I mean, we are the California, Illinois of the Midwest.
Now I live in Tennessee now. I mean, I've moved around the country, but same thing here. No state income tax, and that's partly why we have such a big draw and an influx of the population right now. Like Florida is that way,
Yeah.
Texas that way, Tennessee, South Dakota. I know there's, I think, three others, but yeah, that does make a big difference, and especially if you're talking large operations. So, what about just the regulations, state by state by state? How would, let's say, Iowa compare to Minnesota then?
We built our second plant in Sioux City, Iowa, and I mean, it was just the welcome mat. What can we do for you to get this business going? And so Iowa took what I'd call ag friendly approach, and always has been. They have great regulations, and you just got to follow the rules. And it's a very welcoming environment to do business in. And with the tax changes, I mean, they're just, from our standpoint, Marlon, I'll short up this way. Our When we sell a market pig, that's the state that pig comes from is where I get taxed at. It's just called Nexus. And so when you look at 3.9% versus 9.85%, I can't afford to build another barn in the state of Minnesota, or even look at wanting to do more contracts in the state of Minnesota. Because when you got a 6% difference, I mean that is huge.
Well, Brad, you multiply that out, and I mean, it doesn't apply, of course, just to hogs. I mean, that would
It's
apply to
everything.
poultry farms and, I mean, you name it, any kind of big corporate operation like that, or any kind of a business. I mean, man, that's amazing. I would think that would lead to a big migration.
Well, if it so a fascinating example of this is our son goes to Concordia up in Moorhead, Fargo area, and wonderful business college. But when you cross that border from North Dakota to Minnesota, there is nothing going on in Minnesota, and all the building and all the new happening is going on in North Dakota. And same thing is going to happen or is happening. So Western Minnesota, they move everything to South Dakota. Businesses are moving to Sioux Falls. It's a great city. I think over 30 years it went from 80,000 to I think it's 170,000 today. And if you're on the border state, um, there's no reason you to invest in Minnesota anymore.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but it sounds to me like a similar story to what happened in Illinois. I mean, that's not a very business friendly atmosphere in Illinois anymore either. I mean, yeah, it's the epicenter of the Corn Belt, but when it comes to business operations and like personal income tax and that sort of thing, I mean, they kind of set the bar pretty high, didn't they?
Well, I mean, Governor Walz, I mean, he's basically turning Minnesota into California and Illinois. I mean, we took a $19 billion surplus, and when we got the single party rule in the last legislative session, they spent every single penny of that surplus and increased taxes by 9 billion. That's what our state did. And they've had net migration out of wealth out of the state after that last legislative session. It's going to flee because we're not even talking about estate taxes yet, inheritance taxes, etc. And I mean, they're just horrible in the state.
Well, if you follow this logical path, what does that mean? Are you thinking about pulling up stakes or what?
Well, I mean, we're heavy on fixed assets, so these are 50-year type buildings. So I mean, we got to use them where we're at, but we sure won't add to the pain, Marlin. We will put anything new outside of Minnesota.
So, do you think, regardless of the outcome of the election, that the conditions state by state in that area will stay the same?
I think over time, you know, well, the Cato Institute just published their annual report, and they did a state by state governor's report. And Kim Reynolds, governor of Iowa, there's five that she is listed in top five, and actually she is listed as the first A plus governor. Tim Walz, F. So you got number one governor, state of Iowa. You got the 50th governor in the state of Minnesota.
And what would you say to other producers out there that are looking at similar circumstances? What do you do about it?
Unfortunately, you'd have to question additional investments in the state of Minnesota where it's at today politically. From a long-term business, a 6% difference, Marlon, on your net income. And that's that's a big number. And we work off very narrow margins. And so especially with farming, when you're doing estate planning and things like that, I mean, you have to question why you continue to invest in the state of Minnesota when I was so friendly.
I would imagine you probably get a lot of comments and questions from people around the country. Since you have operations in multiple states, you run across multiple career paths, let's say. Um, Are you comparing notes with other people around the country and kind of getting the word out about what is really going on if you look outside of your own little boundary?
Not really, Marlon. Um, you know, it's the environment that we as a family, Meg and I are, because we're now a family-owned business. Majority of the partners that we started with, we bought out. So, and our three sons, we have three boys. All three are in college, and and quite honestly, Marlon, they own the majority of the business today. So, so as I look at this long term, where we need to allocate capital, I'm really doing it now on their behalf. And I mean, we're not interested any longer from a business standpoint of investing new capital in the state of Minnesota when we got options like Iowa and South Dakota.
Well, Brad, it's fascinating to talk to you. And, in our conversation here, setting up this interview, it was interesting that we kind of started out in similar time frames and had
Yes,
similar experiences. You you made it work much better than I did. But anyway, hats off to you. Kudos on what you're doing. I wish you all the best. And I would imagine if anybody has concerns about their situation, maybe they could give you a buzz
absolutely.
and
Reach out.
actually compare notes a little bit, commiserate, if you will.
That's what
Uh,
I call it.
well, it's great to talk with you. Congratulations on a great, successful business operation. I wish you continued success in whatever you end up doing. And thanks for telling your story. That's Brad Freking with us, and he is with New Fashion Pork in Southwest Minnesota. Very interesting conversation. Again, make sure you like this video, subscribe to these podcasts, and share this video with others as well. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.